Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Knockout Podcast, episode 58. Back for another week. Plenty to discuss as ever. We've got Marina Rodriguez versus Michelle Watson, UFC on Vegas 26 to discuss. UFC on Vegas, UFC on ESPN, or UFC Vegas. We've also got UFC 262 with the vacant lightweight championship belt on the line. There's plenty of other good fights on there to discuss. As ever, I'm joined by Jack. How are you doing, Jack, on this pretty miserable Thursday afternoon?
Yeah, not too bad. It was miserable earlier, but it seems to have actually picked up. It's quite nice and sunny outside for me now.
Oh, so. Is it a bit better where you are? No, we've not been greeted with a particularly good day.
But no, yeah, I'm doing pretty well. The fights at the weekend were, I thought, pretty good. So yeah, I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Not too bad. Before we jump into the fights, I will give a quick shout out to. I feel like it's becoming a staple of my week is just looking up the bonkers stories of the week. Personal highlights from this week were actually a Bellator. So not Bellator. So we've got Derek Anderson who got his nose absolutely caved in by Michael Venom Page. Disclosing on an Instagram post that he had kidney failure during the camp and still kept going, and has then been given a 6-month additional suspension for hiding kidney failure. So that's fun. And then a personal highlight, Rumble Johnson. He's back. Well, is he back for too long? Because apparently he's been arrested and charged with identity theft. So that's a thing.
Yeah, that was my favourite story, but I did have a bit of a brain fart moment when I read it. I was like in my head, I first jumped to, what, did someone else steal his identity and fought as Anthony Johnson in the ring? I was like, that's crazy. What a madman. And he won. But no, and then it half a second, I was like, oh, no, bad, stupid thought. But no, that is very MMA.
Yeah, the thought of someone using his identity to get fights, rocking up to a local state fight club, being like, yeah, I'm Anthony Rumble Johnson. Come on, pay me. Let's get. God, how we? Why on earth Anthony Rumble Johnson wanting to fight on our little small card? But there you go. But so yeah, that's that. Those are my two favourite items of news from the MMA world. The other one was slightly, actually, now it just popped into my head, and I don't really want to discuss it, was that rather concerning video of Diego Sanchez sort of hanging upside down and being sort of looked like he was out of some sort of prisoner of war camp. I think the least said on that, the better. But I think anyone who thought that Joshua Faber had noble intentions with Diego Sanchez has. I mean, I'm not sure there was anybody who thought that,
sure,
but the few people who perhaps believed in him slightly have surely been proven wrong. But that's a story that we talked about last week, and to be honest, it's not exactly particularly nice. So we will instead focus on UFC Vegas 26, Rodriguez versus Watson. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it.
I think it's Waterson. I
think it was Waterson. I think the place will start, if we're working up the card, we may as well focus on the fight that you picked out as your one to look forward to. Greg Gillespie, Carlos Diego Ferreira, and boy did it deliver. I mean, you said it just before we came on air. One of the best sort of grappling matchups or grappling fights in recent memory, and Gregor Gillespie, as we found out, went into the week with a $48,000 show and came out with a $48,000 win, 30% of Diego Ferreira's purse because he missed weight, and £100,000 from the performance of the night bonus. He took the whole lot, so £250,000 for Greg Gillespie and a pretty solid win.
Yeah, no, it was. Just a really, really great fight. The first round was such fun. Ferreira is a real treat to watch on the ground. Really kind of just knows how to turn the tide, and was just is one of the like in like kind of modern MMA, it's very rare to see like jiu-jitsu guys out jiu-jitsu wrestlers. Like most of the time, like the way that MMA seems to work is that the wrestler can like establish control of the BJJ guy and just kind of like hold him and pin him down. But and then often like when you get scrambles, they're very more like wrestling scrambles. But Ferreira really is like superb at kind of BJJing his way out of those wrestling scrambles. So it's a game that you actually don't see like too often at the kind of like in MMA that much anymore. And it really was like a treat to watch. And like at the end of the first round, he was battering Gregor Gillespie. Like you saw him like the elbow that he landed like at the very end, and then Gregor got up and wobbled back to his corner. Really like it was a competitive start to the round, but very well could have been a 10-8 for Ferreira after that. But then just Gregor Gillespie like just then went on to completely outwork him. The scrambles that were there in the first round for Ferreira just weren't there in the second. He faded pretty hard. So like, don't know if that has anything to do with the weight cut. Like maybe there are various reasons that someone might miss weight by that much, and that's either because they've had a real tough time cutting weight and it's been really rough, which will affect your cardio, or he was like fairly lazy in camp and just didn't train as hard as he should have in camp, which would also probably affect his cardio as well. So who knows? But either way, he faded really hard, got outworked from what looked like to be a smaller man, to be honest. Like considering he missed weight, it makes sense. And yeah, just the way Gillespie rallied really was quite inspiring, to be honest.
Yeah, it was a really solid turnaround. I think in that first round you mentioned, you know, the BJJ guy asserting their dominance on the ground, and I think certainly what we saw, I think especially when you contrast that with the Dariush performance from Ferreira, I think it was quite clear early on, at least to me, that you know, but perhaps that was something that Dariush did really well, and I think he does deserve credit in controlling Ferreira on the ground. But yeah. I think what we saw is immediately when it hit the ground, Ferreira was just so much more active, so much more like pushing the pace, trying to work off his back, trying to, you know, change the positions, get into a more favorable position for himself. And I think that is something that I'm sure Gillespie expected. But I think, you know, from contrasting that from the Dariush fight, it was a really solid improvement from Ferreira to make sure that he was more active, because he knew the fight was going to end up on the ground. You know, that's Gillespie's bread and butter. That was where he was going to want to take the fight. That's where he won the fight. But I think that was certainly something in the first round that we saw that really gave Gillespie some problems.
Yeah, I think the Dariush fight is slightly different because here they really were grappling very early on, whereas in the Dariush fight, so as we saw, like Ferreira can fade here, so like possibly that played a factor at least later in the Dariush fight, because I don't think they started grappling until the end of the first round in the Dariush fight, and the first kind of like grappling exchange like happened after Ferreira got dropped by a knee to the body. So it's very possible that in the Dariush fight, Ferreira, when the first time the fight hit the ground, he was in a position kind of mentally and cardio wise in like the same position he was in the second round against Gillespie. I think Dariush did a good job of like sapping him and just not engaging in the grappling whilst he was fresh and at his most dangerous. But still also like big credit goes to Dariush there for still managing to do that. He's going to have, Ferreira would still have something in him, but Dariush managed to control him still. So yeah, as you said, fantastic from Dariush that was. But yeah, it really was just like grappling like is interesting in the sense that you will see like very often you'll see kind of more, well, you'll see often like this, you'll see very even kind of like exchanges and scrambles for a bit of time before like maybe someone starts to come out on top because they have like marginally better technique. And that was in the first round, that was Ferreira. But then also if you keep it going and no one gets a finish, you might then see the tide turn, as happened here, as it really is when it comes down to it. Those scrambles are so tiring that it really is often a matter of who fades first. And we saw that Gregor just seemed to have more in him, which by the looks of him, if you saw him in his corner at the end of the first round, you would never have predicted that.
Yeah, he looked spent at the end of that first round. I think probably, you have to look at how long he was out of the cage for. Yeah, I think he last fought in sort of early 2019. So I'm sure that played a factor. Obviously, the intensity with which they were grappling played a factor. I also think, especially in the first one, and I think his style of takedown was very high amplitude. I think that is a feature of his wrestling. Is a lot of them are quite aggressive, high energy sort of takedown attempts, and that obviously wears on your sort of energy reserves. But yeah, I think certainly at the end of that first round, it was not a foregone conclusion by any stretch. But I think if you'd have put a bet on Gillespie to finish in the second round, having looked so wobbly and so knackered on the stool, you would have won a hell of a lot of money. But,
I think I actually did look at the odds. It was something like Gillespie to win or Gillespie to finish, or so I can't remember. It was like plus 1,200 or something. It was insane. Like, someone could have won a lot on that. But like, why would you? Because obviously it wasn't a foregone conclusion, but to be honest, like my thoughts in between the rounds was like Ferreira's got him here, probably finish him early second round. But no, just a truly fantastic fight. And just a treat to watch, really.
Yeah, a really, really great one, and a fantastic return to action, especially for Gillespie, who, sometimes courted some sort of criticism for boring style in inverted commas. There has been, if you look at his record, he finishes guys. He's very active when the fight gets down there with his ground and pound. But a great win for him. Obviously, very emotional after the fact. But a good win for him, back in the win column, back in action. Crucially, obviously, he had that cancelled fight with Brad Riddell a couple of months ago. I don't know, obviously, what his plans are, but you assume he's going to be looking to keep going forward, keep moving up, and for Ferreira, I don't think this is a fight where in losing his stock has dropped at all. He's had two very good fights against Dariush and Gillespie. Maybe there was once a time where people thought he could be the next guy to venture up the ranks. Maybe that's not to be, but there's still so many fantastic fights and ways for him to make a lot of money and as I said, have a whole lot of interesting fights.
I'm still like I don't think that Ferreira will be making his way up the rankings these days. He's still he's fairly old at this point, I think, as well. Like he always, it was always going to be like a late career kind of resurgence. But now, with the defeats he's faced, I don't see it happening. But I think he can continue to be in very fun fights. So I'll always tune in to watch them.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we'll make our way up the card. We will swiftly swerve De Lima, Maurice Green, because that was an absolute stinker. But needless to say, Maurice Green is no longer going to be gracing our TV screens, which I think is a positive for anyone who likes watching.
Good fights.
Some semblance of technically sound fights. Which is a rarity, even at the heavyweight division, and even more of a rarity if Maurice Green is one of the fighters involved. we'll move on to the aptly named Neil Derby. That the commentators were having enough problems themselves. I think I can't remember who was on commentary, but one of them was referring to Jeff Neal as Neil, and one of them was referring to him as Jeff. So you're like, is one of you talking about Neil as in Neil Magny because you're both on first name? You're both doing first names. It was very, very bizarre. But Neil Magny getting the win, unanimous decision, 29-28, 29-28, 30, 27. I mean, I think one of the things, if we look at Jeff Neal, because I think we both picked him to win, or at least thought he might win. One of the things we mentioned was his left hand is the shot, and he's not very sort of multifunctional when it comes to his fighting. And I thought after that Wonderboy fight, maybe that's the time where you think, okay, I clearly need to add a few more skills to my arsenal if I'm going to really compete up with some of the top guys up at the welterweight division. And for my money, he didn't make those adjustments. He didn't add those necessary changes that I think he desperately needs if he's gonna get himself up there.
Yeah, I think that Magny did a very good job, and he always does a good job of getting the kind of fight that he needs or he wants, despite almost always having, well, he's got a very big frame. He's very tall and he's very long, but kind of athletically, he's almost always at a disadvantage. And generally, technically, in a kind of like technical striking sense, he's also generally at a disadvantage, but he still manages to kind of like leverage his kind of specific skill set in order to get the kind of fight that he wants. And I think that he did a very good job of doing that in this fight as well. Like a very active jab at range, and also mixed in a lot of body work, like particularly like front kicks to the body. And I think Jeff had a tough time of getting in on him, which is why he very often kind of found himself in the clinch, which is what everyone says don't do with Neil Magny. Like that's what he wants you to do. He's massive. He's very good in the clinch and he's inexhaustible. Like he will just keep on going and tire you out. So like Jeff had a bit of success kind of like countering his way in. Like he'd countered with the straight left, and then he'd also kind of pile on Magny, I suppose, when he's against the fence. But Magny did a good job of tying him up in those situations, a good job of adding like attritional damage at range, and really kind of, even though there were kind of scary moments where Neil landed fairly big shots on him, he, like over the course of the fight, did a good job of making sure it was generally in an area where he wanted it. And Jeff really couldn't like force it into those areas where he wanted it.
No, I think I definitely agree with your point about getting the fight to where he's the strongest. And certainly we saw that there was big advantages in the clinch, and his ability to sort of will Jeff Neal on, get him in, and then work his way into the clinch where he did a lot of his best work, especially in that second and third round. But that's what you're going to get with Neil Magny, and I think Jeff Neal knew he was going to get a busy fighter, obviously a big fighter, and there was no attempt to deviate from the plan that he has had in all of his previous fights, which is pressure, look to use that left straight, and rely on perhaps his as you say his physical advantages in terms of natural physical advantages, which was disappointing to see, because I think surely it can't be that difficult to add some semblance of a kicking game. Even if but to distract or just have them thinking that something else is going to be coming other than the left straight, because at the minute that does seem like all he wants to throw, or all he believes is his best option. So it's sorry, we can say something.
Yeah, he's very much kind of like a two-trick pony with like he's got the left straight and the left high kick. And that really is like there's bits in between, there's feints that like he'll use the left straight to counter, he'll use it to lead, he'll do all that. Obviously there is variety in there is some depth. I don't think he could get as far as he did without any depth, but it really is mostly those two weapons.
And certainly it's very much head focused.
Yeah, so like he really could benefit from adding in the left straight to the body. That would work very well for him. And then like a low kick and a body kick. Like that's just like 3 extra strikes that he could kind of heavily incorporate into his arsenal. I mean, like we're not asking him to like go and completely change his style there. He could do that, and then like they're like the body shots and the leg kicks are good attritional damage that he can rack up on his opponents. He doesn't have like a good method of getting attritional damage at the minute because he's mostly focusing on the head to get the knockout shots. And generally, like head damage isn't as attritional, weirdly, kind of as body and leg damage. So those would be good attritive weapons for him. And also, like you can play them off of each other, and like it just adds another kind of like layer of disguise into his overall game. And then he can like, by throwing the left straight, he will have more success with the left hand to the head. So he really could benefit from kind of, mixing up his targets a lot more.
Yeah.
But yeah, what are you going to do? The MMA fighters, do they ever learn? God.
But disappointing win for him. Good win for Neil Magny. He continues to linger around the sort of lower end of the ranking, sort of like a Derek Brunson-esque role within the welterweight division. Just if you can get past Neil Magny, then you're on to something good in terms of the welterweight division. But Jeff Neal is still relatively green in his UFC career, and there's still plenty of time to make those necessary improvements. Co-main event: Alex Morono, Donald Cerrone. Alex Morono coming out with the first round knockout. Is it time to have that conversation about Donald Cerrone? I mean, he's 0-1-5 in his last 6. Okay, I'll caveat that with the first 3 of those losses were Ferguson, Gaethje, and McGregor.
That is true, but
he did look old, and I think that's the best I could put it. He looked old in there. He just looked. There wasn't any point in there where he looked like the Donald Cerrone that pieced Alexander Hernandez up, or the Donald Cerrone of old, and it was not really particularly pleasant to see. I think props to Morono. I think he fought a good fight. Clearly, everyone knows that you can just pile it on Cerrone early. That's often been the thing against him, that he starts slow, but this felt extra slow to me.
Yeah, it was. Morono kind of fought a similar fight to say like similar to Gaethje. It was a lot of like counter right hooks. So it's the kind of fight that Cowboy has lost throughout his career, but just at a much, much lower level. And that's kind of like when it is really kind of like far below like who you should be losing to as Donald Cerrone, you really should kind of like take a step back and kind of reassess whether it's for him anymore. And I think that it probably isn't. Like he did some like fairly decent things. I thought he body kicked quite well. He even kind of like counter body kicked at points, which I thought was quite cool. So like it's not like he hasn't forgotten how to fight, obviously, like not like Diego Sanchez essentially forgot how to fight. But he's just not who he was, and he can't get away with the things that he used to be able to. And yeah, it was a decent performance from Moreno. He did what he needed to do. Didn't look stunning. Kind of looks a bit messy, but obviously got the job done. So, but really is the takeaway is more on the Cowboys should probably retire side rather than Moreno looked good.
Yeah, I think there was a story saying Dana White's willing to give him one more fight at 155. I'm not quite sure what a weight cut at this stage of his career is going to be the thing to revitalize him, but we'll see. I haven't read any comments from him in the post fight, but we will see. But hopefully, as you say, I think the end is very much nigh for Cerrone, which is a shame. But this is mixed martial arts, not bowls. You can't keep going forever.
Yeah.
Main event time. Marina Rodriguez, Michelle Waterson, 48-47, 49-46, and 49-46 for Rodriguez. Obviously, this was late notice. It was upper weight at flyweight, but a solid performance from Marina Rodriguez. A relatively entertaining fight. Not a whole lot, as we were saying before we came on, not a whole lot of things stood out in terms of things to remember from this fight, but a fun fight. I think Marina Rodriguez looks big, especially at 125. Looked impressive, and look, a win over Michelle Walton is always something that is good for any fighter, because she's she's been around for a long time. She's very experienced, and I think Marina Rodriguez is certainly shown that she is someone who should be right up there in and amongst the conversation with some of the other top strawweights.
Yeah, I do actually quite like Marina Rodriguez. She's kind of uncharacteristically aggressive, kind of for 115. She just seems to have a bit of a mean streak in her, which I quite like in a fighter. Often that can be quite cool. So no, she is. She looks to be an interesting kind of prospect. I think that most of the top of the division should. Well, let's have a look. What is the top of strawweight looking like? Because anyone with really half decent wrestling that is near size parity should be able to really give her trouble with their grappling. She is not a good. She does not have good takedown defense. But I think, for example, in this fight, Waterson, I think she got her down once, maybe twice, I can't remember fully, but I think she did seem a bit phased by the size difference and was just not really sure how to kind of like bridge the gap and kind of get her takedowns going, because she does have decent takedowns, Waterson. So I think the size kind of helped her there, but against someone that is bigger than Waterson, who is like a natural atomweight, and someone who has a decent wrestling game, I think she could struggle. But I'm interested to see kind of how she develops.
Yeah, don't be accepting a Tatiana Suarez comeback fight anytime soon. I think no. That would be the one to. Yeah, I think you are right to point out the takedown weakness in terms of her vulnerability to it. It was quite surprising, although I think Michelle Walton has got an underrated takedown ability, but certainly with the size discrepancy, it certainly shouldn't have been something that was able to happen with the ease in which it did. So that is a problem. But as you say, very physical, does look aggressive when she fights, big at the weight. I think there's a lot to like. A good performance. Came out with a nasty jaw injury towards the end of the fight, but she is one that I fully expect to be probably one or two fights away from a title shot. I can't think of too many others other than I guess Esparza, Jan Jacek, Nama Yunus, and Wei Li are probably the only four above her right now. But So there's options there. Perhaps a young Jacek fight is what will happen. We will see, but encouraging signs for her and a solid performance.
Yeah.
Well, that's
more to say.
That's basically everything for that card. As we said, good card, some fun fights, and that absolute banger of a grappling match to start the night off. Let's move to 262 then. Headlined obviously with the lightweight championship fight. We'll get to that in due course. I feel like when this was initially announced, it looked a lot better. And whether that's probably the loss of Diaz Edwards has
that is a big loss. Yeah.
That is a big loss, certainly in terms of name value. I don't know where you want to start.
Hermanson Shabazian, I think.
Yes, that's the other one.
Well. So yeah, I think we lost a few fights from this, which is disappointing. And it now looks to honestly only have like 3 really interesting fights, which are Shane Burgos, Barboza, Ferguson, Dariush. Well, I say really interesting. It's got some name value. It could be quite sad, more than anything, to be honest. And then Charles Oliveira, Michael Chandler, which is very interesting.
Obviously, I mean, I assume you misspoke and you meant to say Gina Mazzani, Priscilla Cachoeira opening the early prelims. I mean, that is
of course banger.
that has got it. I found it quite funny. Someone pointed out that in the same week that Dana White said that Kayla Harrison wasn't ready for the UFC, Priscilla Cachoeira lined up on the undercard of a pay-per-view. feels somewhat questionable, but yeah, I think the 3 that you did point out are certainly the 3 to focus on. We may as well start in sort of chronological order, working our way up. Shane Burgos, Edson Barboza, featherweight clash. Shane Burgos coming off that fight of the year contender, and I don't think that is hyperbole by any means. A cracking fight with Josh Emmett, which he did lose by an unanimous decision, and Edson Barboza getting his first win at featherweight against Makwan Amirkhani. I mean, this has got you've got a fighter like Edson Barboza that likes it when people sort of plod forward with reckless abandonment because he can kick the living daylights out of them, and then conversely you've got a guy like Shane Burgos who plods forward with reckless abandonment, but also seemingly can just take everything and more and keep plodding on. So it's, can Shane Burgos work his way through the wall of kicks? And if he can, then I feel like he's on to a winner.
Yeah. No, I think that, I don't know. Barboza does, I think, struggle. He really struggles when opponents pressure him. And honestly, I don't even think you do need to be that clever or good with your pressure. You said that, like, I think he actually is quite uncomfortable when opponents rush with reckless abandon, to be honest. I think that he doesn't quite know what to do. Although one kind of like rivalry of that, I suppose, is that at featherweight, he's looked much more comfortable kind of like settling into more of a counter puncher kind of like style, as opposed to at lightweight, he was much more of he wanted to set his range on the outside and kick you up. Whereas these days he is okay in a bit more of a firefight, because I think he feels like he's got a bit more power at 145 and he can successfully kind of counter punch with these guys. So that's interesting. But Barboza will be pressuring him. That's not Barboza. Burgos will be pressuring him. That's his game to a T, really. And he has, offensively, I think he's got the right attributes to play that game. Defensively, I think he leaves a little to be desired. He very often tries to kind of like bait with like head movement. but instead of it being bait that he can then kind of like counter his opponent on, he just ends up getting punched. That happens quite frequently in his fights. He'll try and draw that, and it just ends up not working out for him, which is quite funny when it happens. So I think it'll be interesting. I do think that Burgos should have a decent amount of success pushing him backwards and getting past kind of like the kicking line. And then it is down to a game of how is Barboza's like counter-punching game at featherweight going to work out for him here. And also, like, I don't remember, one thing that I do like Burgos about is he will heavily sustain a body attack throughout the fight. He will ruthlessly go after your body. And I don't really recall Barboza facing that many fighters that are that dedicated to the body. So it'll be interesting to see kind of like how that holds up for him, to be honest. But yeah, as you said, I think we do have the makings of a cracker here. So I am excited for it.
Yeah, I think on my, especially with Barboza at featherweight, I think, yeah, definitely. In the past, we have seen a tendency that maybe with the guys that are pressuring forward more, he has struggled. I think in the ego fight, although he did lose, I think a bit controversially, perhaps there is an element that, as you say, at the lower weight, where he's perhaps bigger, a bit stronger, a bit more powerful, that he is able to sustain a bit more pressure with a bit more ease. But it will be difficult against Burgos, as you say, because there is an absolute nutter in there, and I sort of wonder. I can see this going the Barboza versus Justin Gaethje way in terms of Burgos. Just, I mean, maybe not a couple of minutes in, but I can see Burgos getting in, and getting roughing Barboza up to quite a significant extent. Conversely, I can also see a world where this goes the Barboza hook away, perhaps again not to the same extreme, but where Burgos can't get himself in. As you say, he does take a shot to land a shot, and I can see a world where he gets quite brutally pieced up with some of those leg kicks. So it's an interesting one, always an interesting one when you've got those two extremes of how the fight could go, but it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, as you said, like you brought up the Gaethje fight, I think could be an interesting comparison. Gaethje had good success kicking with Barboza, like he didn't let him kick for free, he would kick back at him, and I think that's something Burgos can do as well. So kind of with that in mind, I agree, like it could go the kind of like hooker route. Like it could be a lot of body and leg kicks landing on Burgos, him continuing to plow forward. But I would, if I were to put a bet on it, I'd take Burgos in this one, to be honest.
I don't know. It's I think I might stick with the old guard on this one, but it'll be an interesting one to see how it goes. Caitlin Chookagian, Vivian Arujo, I don't want to discuss because Caitlin Chookagian is still someone that annoys me because I bet on her for Jessica Andrade, but less about that. She is always someone that sort of finds a way to get a win in whatever bizarre way. Another one who sort of yells as they throw strikes that I'm not a particularly big fan of. Sort of the equivalent of a tennis grunt. I don't think you need that, but that's just another thing by the by. We may as well move to the co-main event. Tony Ferguson, Beneil Dariush. Obviously, this wasn't the co-main event, but is now. Tony Ferguson is at a weird point in his career. Obviously, had that rather dramatic and quite stunning in terms of Gaethje's performance defeat to Justin Gaethje, and then had that second defeat to the guy that is now main eventing this card, Charles Oliveira, and I think probably a lot of the conversation will rightly centre on what Tony Ferguson are we going to see, because I think if we see a Tony Ferguson that has made improvements since those last two fights and is perhaps back to obviously not his best, I think we can safely say that those years are behind him.
Yep.
Then someone like Dariush should be an opponent that he can see off. But conversely, the decline that we saw, especially in that Charles Oliveira fight, makes me think that Beneil Dariush will go into this fight with a lot of confidence that he can continue to pile on the misery for Tony Ferguson.
Yeah, this is the kind of fight, if it were happening 4 years ago, no one would be picking Dariush. It's weird how it's come, because they're both old. Like, I think Dariush is even older than Ferguson, if anything. Actually, he might not be. I think Dariush is actually surprisingly young, having said that. He might only be 32, whereas by the amount of time he's been around, he seems like he's getting on for 40. But they're both kind of quite deep in their careers, and you would have thought a few years ago that Dariush kind of might be on the way out and that Ferguson was heading up to the title shot, which unfortunately, he never really got kind of the chance that he wanted, which is very sad. But no, so it's come at a weird time where, if you were to suggest this fight happening 4 years ago, someone would have been like, "What? Why would you even suggest such a fight?" But now, yeah, given that Dariush has looked to still kind of continue to improve at this kind of late stage of his career, is impressive, and the really sharp decline of Tony Ferguson has kind of met. So this is now actually should be a fairly competitive fight. So yeah, big question really is, what Tony Ferguson are we going to see? I think he did say something about the Charles Oliveira fight, something about his camp wasn't good. There was some problems in his camp to do with COVID, I think, and that he couldn't really optimally train, which I can understand. I think it's still it seems so normalized now. Obviously, we're a year or so into COVID, but still, some fighters might not have got the hang of it and how they adapt their training to that. So it's very possible that did have an effect, and certainly possibly a significant one for Tony Ferguson. So again, it'll be interesting to see how he turns up. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think Dariush has kind of accepted his inner wild man on the feet these days. Look at the Drakkar Klose knockout. He's very comfortable these days, throwing himself into the fire. And with kind of old school Tony Ferguson, that would be the recipe for an absolutely fantastic fight. With this Tony Ferguson, we'll see. But if he is anything like his old self, then I think it should be very exciting.
No, definitely. It is. I think Beneil Dariush is certainly a guy that is aging well throughout this sort of second coming of his UFC career. It'll be interesting to see whether he goes with the wrestling route. I mean, he's obviously not got the Tony Ferguson has that threat on the ground, but we saw with Charles Oliveira that there is opportunities to control him. Obviously, I don't think Beneil Dariush has got the same jiu-jitsu threat that Charles Oliveira possesses. But I think as you say, there's a lot of interesting matchups and a lot of interesting elements to this fight. That I can see this one being good, all pertaining to the state of Tony Ferguson.
Yeah.
And that is the big intangible that at this present moment we just don't know enough about. We could see within the first couple of minutes that okay, we've got him back, or equally well it could be sort of as troubling a performance as it looked like and was in the Charles Oliveira one. So it's really one that will be much more interesting to look back on when we know if this decline has been halted or if it's just if it's going to keep going.
Yeah, I agree. I'd love to see classic Tony back. Otherwise, I think it would just end up like, otherwise we are just essentially seeing Tony Ferguson being like turned into name value for up and coming prospects to get a good or signature win against is essentially what we would be seeing happening in real time if Tony Ferguson isn't himself anymore and continues to get booked in these types of fights. Just like building name value off his back and really would kind of like be an end to a kind of sad career in MMA. So I hope Tony looks good and I hope he can get the win, to be honest.
Yeah, I would agree. Main event time. Charles Oliveira, Michael Chandler, the vacant lightweight belt. Obviously, Khabib Nurmagomedov has retired, so up for grabs, and it's the start of a new era for the 155 division. Michael Chandler obviously coming in for his promotional debut against Dan Hooker, scoring a very impressive first round knockout, and Charles Oliveira, who has we talk about Beneil Dariush aging well in his career. I mean, Charles Oliveira has aged like a fine Brazilian wine in his last few years. He's gone on quite the run, ending with obviously a good win against Kevin Lee, and then that dominant performance over Tony Ferguson. I mean, I don't really know where to start, but because there's so many different areas that are so intriguing about this fight. But what are your sort of initial thoughts about this matchup?
Initially, I think that in kind of like the overall shape of the fight and like consistently kind of over time, I would probably expect Oliveira to have the advantages, but Michael Chandler does possess the ability, obviously, to very like definitively put his stamp on the fight and finish it, or even if he just has those big moments, doesn't necessarily get the finish, can turn the tide and keep it in his favor. I expect that generally the person that's being able to pressure will be the one that's winning any given moment. Like from the off, I expect Chandler to be able to kind of implement that more successfully. But I think that Oliveira certainly recently has used his counterpunching as like a method of turning the tide on exchanges. So he'll counterpunch, and then as his opponent backs off from the counterpunch, he'll just really rush into that space and then bring the fight to them. So I think that that's kind of like the general shape I kind of expect. The actual kind of specifics are really who knows. Like there is so much kind of like they've both got such finishing potential. Like Oliveira, the most submissions in UFC history. Chandler got like just knocked out Dan Hooker, who like everyone thought had an absolutely granite chin. So they're both very dangerous, and I expect it to be a fun fight, to be honest, in like everywhere it goes. Like they're both like clearly Charles Oliveira, fantastic grappler, but Michael Chandler's no slouch there either. Good takedown artist and good, like has grappled with very good grapplers in the past. So yeah, I'm very excited for this fight. I think should be a really fun one.
Yeah, I definitely think what we've seen, especially in both of their most recent fights, is they do like to be the one on the front foot. I mean, Michael Chandler's got quite a odd, unconventional sort of stance and way he moves about the octagon. He's obviously got the power in that left hand, and he's got the takedown threat. It'll be interesting to see how much he goes to the takedowns, whether that's something he uses. Obviously, Charles Oliveira carries with him a massive threat on the ground and a willingness to be offensive on the ground. So it'll be interesting to see whether that happens. I was actually watching back Michael Chandler's fight against Dan Hooker, and certainly the left straight to the body was something that he used quite well against Dan Hooker, and you'd imagine with Oliveira's quite high guard, that's something that will work well for him in this fight. And I can see, quite honestly, a finish perhaps similar in manner of the Hooker fight, in terms of feinting the takedown, coming over with the left hand. I'm sure that's something that Chandler will be looking to do to mix in all the threats. But just one more thing. I think it'll be interesting to see how Chandler reacts to the kicks of Oliveira. He's got a fairly active kicking game, and I think if he kind of kicks from the outside to the body, particularly, and to the legs as well, it'll be interesting to see how Chandler reacts to that, because that's something Dan Hooker didn't do really, that I really expected him that he should have done. If Oliveira does that, Chandler doesn't necessarily have the best kicking defense, and will, like, kind of, if anything, from force of habit or like just routine, will often try and catch that kick, bring it into a takedown, which could give a lot of kind of opportunities to snatch the neck for Charles Oliveira. So that'll be interesting as well. I'm just in all phases, I'm excited to see kind of how this match plays out. Yeah, there is a lot of intrigue. Another factor that we perhaps haven't mentioned is the 5-round nature of the fight. There is a very good chance. A very good chance it doesn't go all 5, but Michael Chandler has got quite a lot of 5-round experience in Bellator. This will be Charles Oliveira's second scheduled 5-round fight. His one against Kevin Lee, I don't think, got out of the second or the third.
Yeah.
Could be a factor that comes into it later on if it gets that far down. But also, I think with both of these fighters, there's quite a high chance that we might not see the full 25 minutes. But yeah, as we said, plenty of fun dynamics, plenty of fun elements to this fight. I think I'll be intrigued to see who's the one who's leading the dance in terms of pressuring. I'll be intrigued to see how much Michael Chandler goes to the wrestling, if at all. There is a lot of interesting things to consider, and I'm sure both
Certainly.
of them have done so. That basically wraps up 3 of the main fights on the card. There was obviously plenty more. Jacare Souza's back, Mike Grundy, a bit of British interest. Antonina Shevchenko, obviously, as I said, Gina Mazzani, Priscilla Cachoeira, which I'll certainly be looking out for. But in terms of the key fights that perhaps have got a bit of added intrigue and potential to be high quality, those are the main 3 really. But have you got anything to add?
No, nothing in particular. No.
Well, with those fights being discussed, we'll probably draw this episode to a close. We'll be back hopefully in the week to discuss all the fallout from 262. We've got Rob Font versus Cody Garbrandt at the weekend afterwards. So we'll be previewing a bit of that. But until then, stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you then.
See ya.